April 8, 1944. 1:20 a.m. A low, silver moon hangs over the chalk cliffs of Kent. A damp wind smells of salt and coal smoke. Down below, in a fenced compound of corrugated huts and hastily tended oil drums, men move like actors changing costumes between acts. Boots creak on gravel, whispered orders pass in clipped accents, and in the distance a motorized rumble that sounds like an army on the march is nothing more than petrol engines, canvas, and the orchestration of sound. You can almost hear the nervous hum of radios, some real, some deliberately wrong, threading false stories into the night. This is the quieter half of war, not bullets or tank treads but a theater of illusion. It is not filmed for propaganda, it is engineered to be intercepted. The goal is simple and brutal: convince the enemy to fight a lie. Deception in warfare is as old as war itself. Smoke screens, feints, false flags, but World War II turned it into a strategic weapon on an industrial scale. The Allies did not merely hide troops. They fabricated entire armies, built ghost ports and dummy airfields, scripted phony radio chatter, and cultivated an ecosystem of lies so believable the German high command often accepted fiction as fact. These were the backstage artists of victory, intelligence officers, signalers, sound engineers, and double agents, who built illusions that changed battle plans and saved lives. Why, in 1944, did deception matter so much? The answer has three parts. First, asymmetric necessity. The Allies faced fortified coastlines, entrenched armies, and the political impossibility of opening dozens of fronts at once. If you could make the enemy commit forces to the wrong place, you could reduce the blood paid at the real point of attack. Second, new technologies widened the palette of illusion. Radio interception was routine. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed supply dumps. Radar could detect incoming formations. Each of these systems could be turned into a vector for falsehood. Radio transmissions could be faked, dummy equipment could be laid out in patterns visible from the air, and radar returns could be manufactured or masked. Third, the modern mind is persuadable. Once a plausible story takes root, confirmation bias and bureaucratic inertia make it incredibly sticky. In short, when eyes, ears, and paperwork all pointed the wrong way, entire armies could be held idle while the real invasion unfolded elsewhere. Picture the toolbox. Inflatable tanks and canvas-covered trucks, novelty props with serious impact, sat in fields where reconnaissance planes might blithely count them as armored divisions. Parachuted dummies and sound trucks simulated airborne landings and troop concentrations. Operators created fake radio nets, deliberately sloppy with the details the enemy's codebreakers could intercept and confirm. Radar countermeasures, packages of metallic strips later called window or chaff, were dropped to create false echoes. And behind all this theater sat human credibility, the carefully cultivated reputations of generals, the chatter of news reports and planted leaks, and most dangerously, the voices of double agents feeding a crafted timeline into enemy intelligence. These were not isolated tricks but an integrated deception ecosystem, each element reinforcing the others until the enemy's map of reality was transformed. The British and American planners gave this work a name, Bodyguard, and inside it, operations like Fortitude function like subplots in a very long con. Fortitude's aim was audacious: make the German high command believe that the Normandy landings were a feint, and that the real invasion would come at the Pas de Calais. To do that, the Allies borrowed tools from stagecraft and from intelligence craft in equal measure. Dummy harbors that could be glimpsed from the sea, phantom divisions assigned realistic insignia and camp locations, controlled leaks into the press, and, most effective of all, radio traffic designed to look amateurish, bureaucratic, and absolutely normal. The cumulative effect was to produce a mental map inside German headquarters in Berlin and Paris that deliberately mislocated the Allies' intentions. Those who built the illusions were themselves an odd cast. Officers from the London controlling section, deception specialists in Montgomery's Air Force, sound engineers who could project the thunk of tanks across a valley, and signalers who could write the sort of banal messages that a real army would send. Their work blurred lines between truth and fiction. That blurred line was a weapon, one that required discipline, patience, and cruelty. Every falsehood had to be plausible enough to be believed, but safely constrained so it couldn't unravel the Allies' own operations. Deception was not a gamble with chances. It was a carefully managed risk, calibrated against what German intelligence already expected and what the Allies could sustain. In this opening scene, men moving quietly under floodlight, radios sending the right noises at the right times, you see why deception earned the nickname the Shadow War. It operated in gray tones and in whispers, and yet its effects were concrete. Resources shifted, reinforcements delayed, and commanders made choices based on a constructed reality. Over the following sections we'll trace the practical mechanics of those illusions, how entire ghost armies were given the texture of reality, how a network of double agents sold those lies convincingly, and how new technology such as radar spoofing and chaff became instruments of theatrical warcraft. We'll follow the moments when the masquerade produced decisive results, and the quieter moments where a single intercepted letter or a single believable radio call turned strategy into catastrophe or success. Dawn creeps over the channel, washing the Kent coastline in pale gold. The men who worked in darkness a few hours earlier now blend into a very different scene. Wide fields populated by what look, at first glance, like armored divisions preparing for war. Tanks squat beneath their camouflage nets, trucks form neat convoys, fuel dumps lie stacked and ready. It looks like a staging ground for the biggest invasion in history. But step closer and the deception becomes clear. What sounded like an army is, in large part, theater. The Sherman tanks are inflatable, held in shape by pumps that thrum softly in the morning air. The neatly arranged artillery is made of wood and canvas. The fuel dumps? Painted tarps stretched over empty drums. It is a vast, impossible magic trick. One designed not to fool the men standing here, but the cameras of German reconnaissance aircraft hundreds of meters above. In 1944, this illusion had a name. Operation Fortitude, the linchpin of the broader deception strategy that shielded the true location of the D-Day landings. If Normandy was the dagger the Allies meant to thrust into German-occupied Europe, then Fortitude was the elaborate dance meant to distract the enemy's eyes. The plan's brilliance lay not only in creating something fake, but in making the fake inescapable. The Germans already believed the Pas de Calais was the most logical invasion point. It was the narrowest distance between England and France and the closest position to the industrial Rhine. Fortitude exploited this expectation and fed it relentlessly. Every detail, visual, auditory, and informational, was crafted to make Calais the magnet for German attention. And no part of this deception was more audacious than the creation of an entire imaginary army group. The first U.S. Army Group, or FUSAG. Its commander? General Georges Patton. The perfect choice. Patton was feared and respected by the Germans. Aggressive, unpredictable, and widely considered the Allies' most dangerous field commander. The Allies made full use of his reputation. Patton appeared publicly in southeastern England, visiting fake units, inspecting inflatable tanks, speaking in towns that supposedly hosted tens of thousands of troops. German intelligence tracked his movements obsessively, convinced that wherever Patton stood, the main blow would fall. Around him, the Allies built the infrastructure of a massive, fabricated force. They constructed phantom ports with rows of fake landing craft. Dummy airfields sprouted overnight, complete with wooden fighters carefully placed to resemble real wings of aircraft. Truck convoys, sometimes no more than canvas stretched over bicycles, rolled along predetermined routes where German aircraft were known to observe. But no illusion is complete without sound and signal. In nearby huts, radio operators worked in shifts to generate the staggering volume of chatter a true army group would produce. Logistics reports, command updates, personnel requests. The messages followed real U.S. Army formats and rhythms. Some were intentionally dull, administrative noise that made the existence of FUSAG feel authentic. Others hinted at upcoming movements toward the Calais region. German intercept teams recorded these transmissions faithfully, believing they were mapping the pulse of an enormous invasion force. Even the small details mattered. Vehicle tracks were carved into muddy fields. Laundry lines were strung between tents, because armies produce laundry. Field kitchens smoked at dawn. The illusion lived in texture. The result? By early June 1944, The Germans were convinced that Patton's army, supposedly numbering over 1 million men, was preparing to strike the Pas de Calais at any moment. Even after the Normandy landings began, German command hesitated, holding back key divisions because they expected a second, larger invasion, Patton's invasion, to follow. Operation Fortitude didn't just mislead the enemy. It reshaped the battlefield. And the most powerful support for this illusion came not from inflatable tanks or fake airfields, but from human beings woven into the German intelligence network, whispering exactly the lies the Allies needed to be believed. As the phantom armies of Fortitude took shape across the English countryside, another, quieter operation was unfolding hundreds of miles away, one that wouldn't leave tracks in the mud or silhouettes on reconnaissance photos. Instead, it worked through letters, coded messages, and the carefully curated credibility of people who seemed to the Germans like loyal informants. This was the domain of the XX Committee, better known as the Double Cross System, a British intelligence program that turned enemy spies into instruments of Allied deception. If Fortitude was the grand stage play, the XX Committee was the scriptwriter whispering lines directly into the enemy's ear. The most extraordinary of these double agents was a thin, soft-spoken Spaniard with an astonishing talent for invention, Juan Pujol Garcia, known to the Germans as Agent Arabelle and to the Allies as Garbo. His brilliance did not come from cloak-and-dagger theatrics or daring espionage missions. It came from his imagination. Garbo created an entire network of fictional sub-agents, over 24 of them, each with their own personality, background, and geographic coverage. There were Welsh nationalists, military clerks, dockworkers, pilots, even a dedicated agent stationed in a British port city. None of these individuals existed. Yet Garbo maintained consistent backstories, fabricated travel receipts, and sent meticulously timed messages that mimicked real movement and activity. His reports arrived with the exact tone and detail German intelligence expected. The Germans believed him so completely that they paid salaries to his imaginary agents. But Garbo's importance wasn't just in feeding information, it was in feeding the right information at the right pace. Too accurate, too often, and suspicion would rise. The XX Committee understood this tension. Garbo would occasionally send low-value truths, or send important intel just late enough that it couldn't help the Germans, creating a rhythm of authenticity. Now, as Fortitude ramped up, Garbo's fictional network became the voice that confirmed the existence of Patton's massive Fusag army. His messages reported troop buildups in Kent, noted increased vehicle movements, and hinted at preparations pointing directly toward Calais. At one critical moment he even warned the Germans that an invasion was imminent, timed so that the message arrived too late to act on. The Germans praised him for his accuracy rather than questioning the delay. Meanwhile, the Allies smiled quietly as the psychological trap snapped tighter. Garbo was not alone. Other double agents played equally important if smaller roles. Agent Brutus, a Polish officer, provided steady, believable updates that supported the Calais narrative. Agent Tate, a Norwegian, sent consistent reports on naval activity. Agent Tricycle, a Yugoslav playboy with a flair for charm, helped shape the impression of Allied forces amassing in southeastern England. Together, these agents formed a web of corroboration. One would mention troop movement, another would confirm it, a third would note supply shipments supporting it. The Germans believed they were seeing multiple sources independently verifying the same reality. In truth, they were listening to a single orchestra. By early June 1944, the effect was decisive. When the first Allied troops stormed Normandy, German high command dismissed the attack as a diversion. They believed the real invasion, Patton's invasion, was still weeks away. Critical divisions were held in reserve near Calais, immobilized by the false reports that Garbo and his fellow double agents continued feeding into the system. Even days after the landings, Garbo sent messages insisting that Normandy was a feint, and the Germans believed him. This was deception at its most elegant, human trust weaponized on a strategic scale. With a handful of carefully crafted lies, the XX Committee didn't just confuse the enemy, they shaped the very decisions that determined the course of the war. The success of Fortitude and the XX Committee's intricate web of double agents didn't operate in isolation. As the Allies prepared to launch the greatest amphibious invasion in history, they understood that deception had to extend beyond fake armies and forged reports. It needed to penetrate the battlefield itself, where radar pulses swept the skies, where German operators listened for engines in the dark, and where every echo, every flicker of light, every movement on a screen could tip the balance of war. By 1944, technology had become a battlefield language of its own, and the Allies learned to speak it fluently, then weaponized it. Radar was the new high priest of early warning systems. German stations perched along the coast watched the channel with rotating dishes capable of seeing far beyond the horizon. These systems could detect formations of bombers or fleets of ships moving in the night. To blind those eyes, the Allies needed something simple, precise, and overwhelming. The answer? Strips of aluminum and paper, cut to specific lengths. They called it window. The world would later call it chaff. When dropped from aircraft, these small metallic strips fluttered through the air, scattering radar waves in all directions, creating phantom fleets and illusory air formations. On German radar screens, window filled the display with static, false returns that looked identical to real targets. Entire bomber formations became ghosts. Convoys seemed to multiply. And on the night before D-Day, window would be one of the most important elements of the grand illusion. But radar deception was only one part of the technological symphony. Farther inland, teams of engineers operated sonic deception units, massive speakers mounted on trucks, capable of projecting the rumble of tank divisions or the clatter of armored columns moving under cover of darkness. These units could make a regiment sound like an army, or an empty field sound like a motor pool preparing to mobilize. The recordings were painstakingly crafted. Tank engines starting, gears grinding, artillery pieces being loaded. Played through specialized equipment, the sound could be thrown across miles, bouncing off terrain features and creating the terrifying impression of overwhelming force. Then there was visual camouflage, a discipline the British excelled in. Camouflage units created elaborate patterns of nets, paints, and fake shadows that transformed airfields into innocuous villages and military depots into patches of farmland. Real aircraft were hidden inside false buildings. Anti-aircraft guns were disguised as haystacks. Supply dumps were buried beneath layers of paint designed to trick aerial photography. Every possible sensory channel became a doorway for deception. The climax of these efforts came in the final hours before D-Day. While real invasion fleets gathered in the southwestern ports, specially equipped aircraft and small naval units carried out Operation Taxable and Operation Glimmer, radar-based illusions meant to suggest large forces approaching Calais. Window clouds drifted across the radar horizon, creating the impression of dozens of landing craft. Fast-moving boats transmitted fake radio chatter and used reflectors to mimic the radar signatures of full fleets. To a German radar operator, it appeared the Allies were massing for exactly the invasion they expected. And the brilliance of this deception was not simply in confusing the enemy, it was in doing so at the decisive moment. When pre-dawn darkness swallowed the channel on June 6, 1944, German defenses were effectively blinded. Their radars saw ghosts. Their operators heard phantom engines. Their watchers observed movements that never occurred. And their commanders hesitated, caught in a fog of illusions where nothing could be trusted. Technology had become a stage on which shadows danced. And the Germans couldn't tell which shadow was real. The battlefield itself had become part of the act. One more layer in a multi-layered deception effort that ensured the real invasion force could cross the channel under a cloak of doubt and confusion. First light over the English Channel on June 6, 1944, revealed a sight that would become etched into history. Thousands of ships pushing toward Normandy under a gray dawn sky. But what the world remembers as D-Day was, in many ways, only possible because of something far quieter. An elaborate tapestry of illusions woven over months. While Allied troops stormed the beaches, the Germans waited anxiously for an invasion that would never come, staring toward the Pas-de-Calais and bracing for a blow that existed only in their minds. This was the ultimate measure of success. Not simply landing at Normandy, but landing without the full weight of German reinforcements crashing down on the beaches in the first crucial hours. In the hours after the first wave hit, German commanders hesitated. Reports streamed in, scattered paratroopers, warships offshore, beach landings. But where was Patton? Where was the main force? Their maps, thick with false radio traffic and double-agent warnings, insisted Normandy was a diversion. Their radar screens, scrambled by chaff, showed phantom fleets. Their intelligence reports, painstakingly crafted by the XX Committee, confirmed Calais remained the true threat. So they waited. And that hesitation cost them the war's most decisive day. What unfolded on those beaches was bravery, sacrifice, and grit, but it was also the result of a strategic illusion that bought the Allies precious time. Hours turned into a full day, then two. German armor held back at Calais remained there even as the real invasion force secured beachheads and pushed inland. By the time German high command realized the truth, the Allies had punched a permanent hole into Fortress Europe. Yet for decades after the war, much of this deception went largely unnoticed by the public. Soldiers saw the beaches, historians recorded the battles, veterans told stories of charging across sand under fire. Deception, by its nature, leaves no monuments. Inflatable tanks rot. Fake radio logs are burned. The men and women who orchestrated these illusions worked in silence, often sworn never to reveal their roles. In many official histories, the ghost armies and shadow operations were footnotes compared to the massive movements of divisions and fleets. But without these shadows, without Garbo's lies, Patton's phantom army, the radar ghosts over the channel, and the sonic illusions rumbling across empty English fields, victory might have come at a far greater cost or not at all. The legacy of these deception operations didn't end in 1945. Modern military strategy absorbed their lessons deeply. Today, electronic warfare units jam radar just as Windows once did. Cyber operations plant false data inside enemy systems the same way double agents once seeded lies through coded messages. Drone decoys mimic real formations. Psychological operations shape enemy perceptions long before the first shot is fired. The battlefield has changed, but the principle remains eternal. If you can make your enemy believe a lie, you can make them fight the wrong battle. World War II proved that deception, when executed with precision, creativity, and patience, is not merely a supporting tactic. It can be a decisive weapon. It can alter timetables, shift armies, collapse strategies, and, in the case of D-Day, change the destiny of an entire continent. In the end, the greatest Allied weapon was not always steel or firepower, but imagination.